Good evening. I'd like to call to order the City of West Bend Licensing Board for September 26th. Note that we have a whopping 2 items on our agenda. First being approval of the minutes, the Licensing Board regular meeting minutes from August 15th.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you. It's been motion second. Any comments or corrections? Hearing none. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And under agenda items for consideration, number 2, extension of premise and sidewalk cafe for the historic West Bend Theater located at 125 North Main Street in West Bend. Before we discuss and vote on this item, I am going to invite up Bill Bittner, who is the executive director of the Bend, to tell us a little bit about this project and what they have coming up. So welcome, sir, and your lovely guest.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm very shy.
Bill, do you mind jumping in front of the microphone?
Which way?
You can leave her however you want.
I decided to travel with my friend here, Erica Rhodes. So the first reason that I'm here is the extension premise. What we'd like to do is put some tables with chairs right outside the Bend. Jim and Lisbeth came and helped us set the tables out, and they fit very nicely right in front of the Bend, actually in front of the windows, which is going to give us good visibility from the inside out. The reason for that is we do get a lot of guests that come in. They'd like to have a drink, and they'd like to go outside and vape and smoke, and then we watch at the door to make sure nobody takes a cocktail outside with them. But having the extension of premise, they'd be able to go sit at the table and just have a smoke and then come back in. I don't really foresee them spending a lot of time outside because they're coming to the Bend, obviously, to see an event. So they're not going to want to, buy a drink and sit outside when they paid to see some entertainment. So it's just accommodate the guests that want to go outside for a little bit and have a beverage and, like I said, a smoke or a vape. So that's why we applied for that. So we respectfully ask for your consideration on that. And then the reason I brought Erica with me is she's a very well-known entertainer. She was at the Bend last year. I wasn't there at the time, but I know she was there. She was very well received. We've invited her back, and she's going to be coming to the Bend to perform, and it's going to be tied in with the tree lighting ceremony in downtown West Bend. So Erica, with 2 other companions, they do music, they do comedy. They'll be part of the Old Settler Square tree lighting, and then they'll be performing at the Bend doing several things on, I think it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So we've been putting little statues of Erica around town here at the Bend and at a couple of the sandwich restaurants, and we'd like to put her in the lobby here if that's okay for a couple days just to get some visibility, because I think it's going to be really good for West Bend. It's going to bring a lot of people into town. I know they're bringing quite a staff with them that we're putting up at the hotels, so it's just going to be good for tourism and everything in general.
Thank you, sir.
Questions? Can I leave Erica here?
Yeah, I guess.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Erica.
Thanks, you guys.
All right. I'll open up to the licensing board if they have any questions, comments, or would like to make a motion.
Just a comment. Thank you very much. I appreciate the Bend moving forward like they are, and it is a great asset for downtown. So great job out there.
Thank you. It's our pleasure.
Amen. Would you like to make a motion too while you're at it?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none. All those in favor, so by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And having no further business for the licensing board, I'll adjourn. And I'm going to ask, since Alderman Model is not here, would you mind Alderman Butchlick taking over finance?
I certainly can.
Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to call to order Finance Committee. We have 2 items on the agenda. First one is approval of the minutes from regular meeting August 15, 2022.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay. Any corrections or deletions? There are none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item number 2, a resolution accepting donations for smoke alarm program. Good morning. Good evening, Chief.
How are you doing? I was wondering if you were going to tackle that name or if you wanted me to.
Luchwak.
The one that's in the resolution here. Mrs. Luschwiger, I believe is how you pronounce it, has given us an awesome donation of $200 towards the West Bend Fire Department to thank us for our service. We're going to put that money into our smoke detector program. And again, that's the free smoke detectors we give away and CO detectors. It's an awesome program to make sure the residents are safe, so we appreciate that donation.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any comments or questions? No comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Chief, and
Thanks.
thank you very much for the donation. Being no further business before the Finance Committee, I adjourn.
Thank you, and I'll call to order the City of West Bend Common Council meeting for September 26th at 6:30. Note that we do have a quorum with Alderman Model absent. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I'll note that we have 7 items on our agenda, the first being approval of the Common Council meeting minutes, the regular meeting from September 12th.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Alan and Kaler. Any comments or corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And if you don't mind, I'd like to take the mayoral appointment item number 4 in front of our presentation so we don't have to allow Mr. Michael Blaskowski to wait for too long. So I'm going to jump down to number 4, which is the mayoral appointment of Michael Blaskowski to the Airport Commission. Thank you. Thank you, Kaler and Bergquist. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thanks for stepping up, and thanks for attending tonight. You're welcome to stay if you'd like. Sounds good. And we'll move on to our presentations, our tax incremental district update and debt presentation by Phil Cosson of Ellers. Welcome. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Phil Costin with Ellers, good to be back with you. And don't be scared by 40 pages. I'm going to get through this relatively quickly. There's a number of topics here that I've been asked to address. I've given this same presentation a few times, and we've had a few add-ons here that we're going to touch on. Historically, we've talked about all the tax increment districts, and I'm going to probably be a little more brief in regards to the tax increment district. I know we have a few newer council members, so a little bit of TIF 101 has been included just to kind of give you a little primer of what it is and what you can and cannot use it for. I'm also going to talk a little bit about your existing debt. We also have a kind of scaled down version of a capital plan in here, showing kind of tax impacts, and I'll talk about that. Levy limits. Every community lives under levy limits, and we're gonna bolster some of the discussion around levy limits because there are some pressing issues regarding levy limits, and I want to spend a little more time on that with you to get you comfortable with some of those concepts. And then finally, not on that list, you'll see that we also have expenditure restraint, which is a little bit unique program and a big switch to that program this year due to the inflation, some of the inflation issues. So a lot to cover, and then I'm going to just kind of move through this relatively quickly. Stop me, yell, raise your hand, whatever, and I'll be happy to take questions along the way. So let me just start by talking about tax increment financing, because the city has been very active in the use of tax increment districts over the last couple of decades. You have a number of existing districts that are open. Some are kind of closing out, they're almost hit their maximum life, and they're kind of closing out over the next couple of years. So they're just kind of playing out. Others that have been newly created over the last couple of years are going to be very active over the next probably 3 to 5 years. But with the tax increment program, you got to keep in mind there's the fundamental test is the but-for test. And when you create a new district, the city has to work with their partners, the school, county, technical college, who all have a seat at the table, and have everybody come together and ask the question, would this development occur without the use of TIF? And if it would, then you're not supposed to be creating a TIF district for that purpose. But rather, you need to be able to say that this project would not move forward without the use of that financing program. We've kind of narrowed in and added a few things because it's not as black and white. It's a little bit of gray. And we always say that, you can ask that but-for test, but would the development happen as proposed? Potentially the city put some parameters around what you would like to see within the same time frame, same level of value, property, jobs, or amenities. So you can look at it a number of different ways, but when we create a TIF working with staff, we do need to answer that but-for test in every case. So we went through that process with all the TID creations that have happened. Quickly, how TIF works, it's really a financing tool, let's face it. So when a property is created, a new TIF, you draw a boundary around a number of properties, and the value that is there when the district is created is the base value. That base value, when the taxes are collected on that base value, what was there now, gets shared with the county, Tetro College, and the city gets their roughly 20% of that tax bill. As development occurs above and beyond what was there today, as new development happens, that's increment. Increment is just increased taxes being paid by new development. And the power of TIF is all of that revenue stays with the city. It doesn't go to the county, technical college, or school district, which is why they have a seat at the table in this process. And so that increment then is used to reinvest back into the tax increment district, either in the way of public infrastructure, incentives, whatever it takes to drive that development or redevelopment forward. There's all kinds of rules and regulations regarding TIF. The one key one that really dictates whether or not you can create a district is 12%, the 12% test it's called. So nobody in the state, doesn't matter if you're Pittsville or Milwaukee, it's the same threshold. 12% of the total valuation can be, if you're under that 12% of the valuation of the community, you can still create new districts and or amend the boundaries of existing districts. Once you're over 12%, that's not a bad thing, just means you're TIF'd out, meaning you can't create new districts until you start closing out older districts. Right now, the city of West Bend is at 9.81% of that 12% test, up from 8.72 last year. Doesn't sound like much of a move, but it was big. It's a substantial amount that has been added. So as districts become successful, I'm going to point out like Milwaukee Tool adds on, HKS develops. You're going to get close to that threshold of 12% until you start actually closing out districts. So right now you still have capacity. Different types of districts can be created. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. It can either be for rehab, blight, it can be for industrial development, can be for a mixed development, housing, industrial, commercial, variety. So there's a variety of types of districts that can be created, and each type of TIF has different rules assigned to them. Typically, they can remain open for 20 to 27 years, depending on the type of TIF, and you can spend money for up to 5 years of the maximum life. So different rules tied to each one of the types of districts that are out there. So what can you do? I mentioned, you reinvest back into the TIF, and these are project costs that are eligible if they're approved as part of the project plan. Obvious projects, the obvious things are public works improvements, streets, storm, water, sewer, those kind of improvements. Real property assembly, you can do land write-downs. You can pay for professional service as you hire attorneys to work on development agreements, as you hire engineers and planners to put together the plans, those kind of costs. Small amount of administrative costs. There are annual filing fees and such. Those can be charged against the TIF. You can do other things like relocation costs, organizational costs, prorated costs of utility infrastructure. And then the big one that we use often to kind of spur development or redevelopment are development incentives, actual grants and incentives that go back to developers. So there's a lot of different uses. Also, the law was changed a number of years back where you can spend money within a half mile of the district. And if you think about it, it's think like a business park. or the main road coming into the business park that deteriorates over time because of the increased truck traffic. That's the kind of project they had envisioned to be able to be paid for by the TIF, even though it's not in the boundary. So prohibitive costs, what can't you do? And the list is relatively small, but it's substantial. One is constructing any type of administrative, police, fire, community, recreational, library, school buildings. Those are not tied to tax increment districts. You can have those projects be within the boundaries of a district, you just can't pay for it out of the TIF. Costs of constructing or expanding facilities, if similar facilities are normally financed with utility user fees, they don't want you double dipping in those kind of projects. Government expenses not related to TIF. You can certainly charge people's time if they are spending a lot of time on different aspects of implementing a TIF plan. But there too, you got to be a little careful that you're not just adding it to the budget. And then there are restrictions around residential development. There are certain types of districts where you can include small portions of residential within a tax increment district. Amendments, the real benefit of the program that hasn't been curtailed, we keep waiting for it, is that when you create the district, it's not a one-shot deal. You actually have the ability to amend the boundaries up to 4 times. You can add projects. You can subtract parcels even. So there's some flexibility once a district is put in place. It's not set in stone, and you have flexibility. The city's used that amendment process a number of times and been to bring in other potential development areas. So, frequently asked TIF questions that we hear all the time and we get, is TIF a tax break? You'll hear all kinds of rumors that the people that are in TIF districts don't pay any taxes. It's not true. Properties, they pay the exact same tax rate that a property owner outside of TIF would. The difference is what happens to the money. And I talked about how it gets distributed if you're in and outside of a TIF. But you certainly will pay the full amount that anybody else outside of the district would pay. Is TIF only for blight? It's a significant use, but a lot of tax increment districts were created for industrial parks. They were created for a lot of different purposes. So not only blight elimination, that was one of the original purposes. Does the TID change the zoning for property? Not automatically, but in many cases you can imagine you have a maybe vacant land that's being rezoned for another use, or you have a redevelopment project downtown, maybe it was old commercial, industrial that's being repurposed into residential. So yes, in many cases you're changing the zoning because of the ultimate land use that's going to be within the boundaries of the district. Does the TID make it easier for the municipality to use eminent domain? I tell the joke years ago that I had a guy wrapped up in the American flag yelling at me because I was going to take his property. And I was like, I'm not sure I have that power to do that anyhow, but no, as it's not the first step in eminent domain. There's some real challenges for the use of eminent domain in the state case law out there. So that's really challenging these days. But no, it's not the first step. So why, in your case or in other cases, are incentives offered or provided to different companies or developers? One, well, communities want to foster economic development and or redevelopment. Downtown, you've invested a lot of money in your downtown. You've seen a lot of redevelopment occur in the downtown. As you sell out business parks over the years, you needed space for local companies to be able to expand. So you've created new business park opportunities. And then housing is still first and foremost out there as far as needs. And so this is a tool that can be used to foster different types of housing. So it's really a reinvestment into the community. Developers want to make a profit, and many, given what's happened with land costs, what's happened with the cost of building supply, it's challenging without some incentive to move some projects forward. So they still need a reasonable rate of return to move forward with the development. That but-for clause is always out there, though. We need to demonstrate if there's any incentive going to a developer or a company that they really need that to pursue staying or moving to West Bend. As always, do your due diligence. When is an incentive provided? It can be either at the beginning of a project, upfront incentive, which is typically not how the city has done it. The city has typically used the pay-as-you-go or develop reverse TIF, it's called, to be able to help finance projects. So the project goes in, there's additional taxes being paid, and potentially a small portion of that goes back to the developer. So the real question is, how the risk is shared, and we work closely with your city attorney and staff in each case. So really, there's no way to fully mitigate the risk of tax increment districts, but there are ways to kind of curtail some of the challenges. There's a number of different ways within a development agreement to mitigate some of the risk, but as always, there's a little bit of risk in every deal. This is a map of your existing tax increment districts. It's hard to see. But you've seen that map. I'm sure Mark has provided that to you in the past as well. And this is a list of your existing tax increment districts. Not sure I have all the appropriate names anymore, but they're probably the appropriate names when they were created. So TID 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, they've been around for a long time. 8's being closed. And 9, all those have been around for quite some time. River Shores has been around for a while as well. The last couple, West Bend Manufacturing Center, where Milwaukee Tool is expanded, and then the HKS Downtown Riverfront Housing Development as well. So you do have a lot of existing districts. As I said, some are kind of playing themselves out, and others are relatively new, but those are all the existing districts that are out there. This is a little bit difficult to see, I know. But what we're getting to here with this slide is we're looking at how much of the existing city's existing debt is related to tax increment districts. And in this slide, you'll see that even though we have issued some debt for TID 14 and 15 of recent, you're still seeing actually the debt service annually drop in the tax increment districts. And if you look all the way on the left-hand side and kind of slide over, you can see TID 3 is going to be fully paid off this year as far as debt. TID 4's debt's been paid off. TID 5 will be paid off in 25. TID 7 in 26. So a lot of the obligations in those districts are being paid off in the next couple of years, which in some cases will probably lead to a closure. So we're just showing you kind of what the overall debt for the TIDs are on this slide. So a little focus on this slide because this gets into kind of the more of the managing of the districts. So every year on 8/15, the new valuations come out. They come out at 8/1, then 8/15 by the Department of Revenue. And that just shows you how much incremental value, how much new growth has happened in the tax increment districts in that year and then cumulatively since it's been created. And if you look at what's happened in the city just over the last year, the incremental value, meaning the new value that's occurred in the existing districts, was $303 million. That's a lot of value that's coming into those districts. In 21, and that's bumped to almost $400 million, $391 million in 2022. Now that's development that occurred by the end of 21. Nothing that's occurred in 22 in that calculation. So each tax increment district actually had increases this year. Now part of that is construction, and some of that is obviously what we're all seeing, kind of property appreciate in value. So it's that combination. that you see. So some of the nuance within the districts, as always, TID 5 and 9, which were the original downtown districts, where a lot of property was purchased, torn down to clean up the area. Shortfalls in those districts continue, but revenues from TIDs 4 and 6 offset those shortfalls. So there's no levy support there at all, but rather 4 and 6 are paying that. TID number 10, there had been shortfall payments being made by the developer, Hendricks Development. That's kind of flipped and really eliminated in 2021 at this point. So that's going to be kind of just playing out over the next number of years. Understand there may be a property sale in there as well. TID 12, there are shortfalls now being offset by a new development that's occurring in TID number 12. TID 11 and 13, there are shortfall payments that are being levied, kind of managed at this point, and with more development in those districts, hopefully we'll see those diminish over time as well. So there had been past advances from the utilities and general fund that are slowly being reimbursed back to the utilities and the general fund. I'll tell you that. I'll give you those numbers in a little bit, but that's good news overall financially for the city. I wasn't going to spend much time on each of the districts, rather kind of just point to the actual value that's in the districts and let you know if something has happened of recent. TID 3, Ziegler-Benz, $36 million. They had previously been paying in shortfall payments. We are now at a point where the debt's retired and they're getting reimbursed back. So that's a district that is just going to play out over the next couple of years and then close out. TID 4, the West Bend Corporate Center, $95 million in value. TID 4 has remained open to share revenue with TID 5 and 9. And the longest you can keep that district open is the period of time that was the revenue sharing. So the revenue sharing will allow you to keep that district open until 2030, but not beyond that. So at that point, that district is required to close out. Even if 5 and 9 remain open, that district is required to close out at that time. TID 5, again, Wisconsin Street Depot area, $20 million in value. They're almost at this point. That's grown quite a bit over the last couple of years. And they do receive, this district does receive revenue from 4 and 6 to help support it. TID 6, I call the Menards Paradise Drive area. It's $67 million in value out there. This too has been kept open to share revenue with TIDs 5 and 9 as well. TID 7, the East Industrial Park saw pretty good growth, I noticed this year, but again, this district I know was amended recently to share or for 3 years and will remain open now till 25 and try to repay some of the advances that have been made by the general fund for TID 7. TID 9, Veterans Avenue Auxiliary Court, $2.4 million in increment. This does also have a number of pilots assigned to it, pilot payments from developers. But again, this is where 4 and 6 excess revenue goes to support as well downtown. TID 10, River Shores, $53 million in value. Again, this district was distressed, can stay open for a longer period of time. I mentioned this earlier, the Hendricks Group was making shortfall payments, and it's kind of reversed back now. Over the next number of years, they'll be fully reimbursed back for the payments that they made in. River Road Industrial Park in 11's got $23 million in value. This is one of the districts that has, I'll say, maybe underperformed a little, and as such, there's been some support from the levy over time, and hopefully that'll turn. But this was distressed as well. So we have a longer period of time to collect revenue and hopefully reimburse back any advances that have been made. Gale Company, we're seeing a lot of development in that area. This was a significant jump in value. I know there'll be more value added almost 50 million in value now in that district, and it's gotten very healthy. 13, former Amity site, about $4 million. This is one that also there's some shortfall payments that are made to this district, which was really a partnership between CryoCamp and Serigraph. 14, really early in the process, but a nice jump due to the valuation coming from Milwaukee Tool. It's a 17 million in value. So early in this process in 14. And 15, a little delay in the development with HKS. The good news there is very little money borrowed at this point in this district. And the majority of the incentive here is really that reverse TIF I talked about, meaning is they have to build it to receive the incentive. So very little risk here, but as I'm sure everybody would like to see that move forward. There's a little bit of value that's been created, but how this is structured will really eliminate a lot of the risk to the city. So financial impact of TID closures. TIDs 3, 4, 6, and 7 will occur. The closure at the conclusion of the reimbursement back of advances that have been made. The city levy is allowed to increase. So when the districts are closed, there's a levy adjustment that is made under the levy limit law that will enable you to kind of increase your levy above your normal net new construction number. So there's an extra bump when you do close out districts. And we expect to see continued reimbursement to the sewer and general fund over the next 6 years. In 2022, the water utility was reimbursed $322,000. That was fully paid, so no funds owed back to the water utility. $919,000 went to the sewer fund from the TIDs, and there's still an advance that's going to be reimbursed back for a period of time there, and $517,000 to the general fund. There too, future advances will be, or past advances will be reimbursed back by those tax increment districts. So really, you're in a position now where you're actually seeing those advances come back to the sewer utility and the general fund. So before I leave TIF, that was a lot. I can wait till the end for questions, or are there any questions at this point? Otherwise, I'm going to jump into debt.
Yep. Alderman Allen.
Alderman Allen?
Just a quick question on boundary amendments. TIDs can be have to be contiguous,
Correct.
or can they be non-contiguous?
No, they have to be contiguous, and so that's why you see a lot of districts kind of have kind of interesting maps because they're trying to get to certain parcels. But when you do an amendment, you have to have all the parcels have to be contiguous.
And so you couldn't have a hole in the middle of the TID.
That's correct.
You'd have to build a walkway to it.
Well, you have to use parcels only. You can't run down highways. You can't run down railroad tracks to get the parcels. So it's got to be parcels and not use of things like highways and roads.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on TIF? Let me just talk a little bit about debt management. I think, quite frankly, since I've been around, the city's overall debt burden has really flattened out over the last decade, and some of that is attributed to there are a lot of districts that were created a number of years back, and you're investing into those and you're borrowing funds to do so. But there's been a significant reduction in the overall debt burden in the city, and a flattening of the annual debt service that has occurred over a period of time. Historically, the city has borrowed $3 million annually for general capital projects. You'll see in our model we continue that. I'll show you in a little bit. You can forget about the third bullet point. Interest rates keep going up, and so for a long time we were able to refinance debt, and really there was a real benefit to the city. Levy, TIFs, utilities when we did that. We don't see that happening anytime soon. But here's one point that I'm just on the fourth bullet point is really critical. The city's really in a unique position. I work for a lot of communities around the state, and most communities, what they'll tell you is they are levied to the max. And I'll talk about what that means in a little bit. You are not, meaning you have flexibility that a lot of communities don't. And I'll leave it at that, and we'll touch on that in much more detail in a little bit. This is your debt burden, current, and taking into account $3 million borrowing in future years. And I think what's really notable here is that you, at one point, were well above 50% of your borrowing capacity. Now, again, nothing wrong with that. It's just that there was a lot of money that was being borrowed for a lot of these tax increment districts early on. You have shrunk that to under 40%. So a pretty significant drop in the amount of outstanding debt. Plus, you've grown substantially in that time, and that's part of the calculation. So it just kind of gives you a feel for what it looks like, even with future borrowings. You never get back above anywhere near that 50% threshold. You stay under 40%. And then also here, when we do a debt issue, we do spend quite a bit of time with you talking about these slides. But what I wanted to demonstrate here also to you is that even when we take into account future debt issues at $3 million each, and assuming all of those projects are going to be levied, not TIF, not water, sewer, but actually levied, you can see that on this slide that we stay in that roughly $1 per thousand, which is your levy, debt levy. Now, at one point, again, you were about $1.50 per thousand, so that number has come down quite a bit. And this is, again, takes into account roughly $3 million borrowing each year. And we don't get overly aggressive with growth. So we're using, in this model, growth at 1%. So you've seen a lot more growth than that over the last number of years. And even with that, you're able to really kind of maintain a pretty level levy for debt, and then also a pretty level tax rate for debt going forward. So again, better position than you've been in over a period of time, and that's it looks to be sustainable going forward. Any questions on debt or debt practice? All right, the last two topics are a little more complicated, if those haven't been so far. Levy limits is unique to Wisconsin, and you've been under levy limits for a long period of time now, 15 plus years. And the law hasn't been tweaked that much of late. I mean, for a while there was a lot of tweaking that was going on, but of late it hasn't. There hasn't been much that has occurred. So what is levy limits? So it's in Wisconsin statutes, if you're really bored and want to read it. 66.0602 is the Wisconsin statute that ties back to the levy limits. But simply put, in the blue there, what we identified, the prior year's actual levy may be increased by a percentage equal to the net new construction in the preceding year, or zero if there was no net new construction. So in your case, it fluctuates like everyone else every year. Net new construction moves around as development occurs. In 2023, 2022 net new construction for 23 budget, the net new construction you're going to use is 1.94%, or approximately $400,000. So that's what it equates to, roughly $400,000 out of your, I should know, probably about $22 million budget, ballpark. Not a lot. I mean, you think about inflationary pressures that you're going to have right now with just fuel costs and a lot of other things that are going to press the budget. That $400,000 doesn't go real far. We do hour-long presentations on levy limits, so I'm trying to boil this down really quick here. Now, the levy, then in addition to that calculation, if you close a district out, tax increment district, that can impact that number. There's a separate calculation. There's also a whole list of levy limit adjustments that are also allowed to be taken, of which the majority you'll never use. But there are those adjustments. The most common is adjustment E, which is existing debt. That's the debt adjustment. I'll be talking more about that in a little bit. And that allows you to put on principal and interest payments onto your levy that are going to be actually levied. Not for TIF or not for water or sewer or other funds, but what's going to be levied, you actually have the ability to put that with principal and interest payments on adjustment E and increase your levy. In your case, the city's case, and this is where I talked about where you have a lot of flexibility, you have historically really not done that. You've taken maybe just a little bit once in a while, but it's modest. Your debt levy is about $3.6 million. That's flexibility, because you haven't used that. You have around $3.6 million in flexibility that you could move to and use if need be to adjust your budget. So that's the flexibility that you have that a lot of communities don't, because many communities have taken that full adjustment E and they put the full amount on there every year, and that's what they have. They can't move the needle at all besides net new construction. So adjustment E is really your primary flexibility when it comes to levy limits. And if you really think about it, because you are essentially levying as part of your operating budget $3.6 million of debt payments, that's really kind of competing for in your operating budget for other costs that are out there. So that's where you're at this year, about roughly $400,000. So I just touched on this. So under levy limits, there's really three components. There's the operating, which is subject to levy limits. That was last year's operating budget. You have capital projects. So if you try to do capital projects as part of your operating budget, that's subject to levy limits as well. That's why it's so hard these days for communities to actually budget for equipment and large-scale road projects and those kind of things, because that is subject to levy limits. So that's that $400,000 I'm talking about. But geo debt service is not subject to levy limits. It's outside of that calculation, and that's, again, where your flexibility is. So, hard to read, I acknowledge, hard to read. But this is actually your levy limit worksheet, which we take and then we model it over a period of time. And you don't have to worry about anything that's on this sheet except for the last row. And the last row, what we're getting at is what has been essentially your unused levy that you have the ability to use, and that's that debt adjustment. And it's fluctuated a little bit, but it's roughly that $3.6 million, which is your debt service levy number, okay? So that is that flexibility that I referenced. On your not on this page, but on your levy limit worksheet also, if you looked at your first page of your levy limit worksheet, there is a carry forward adjustment option as well. And the city has about $271,000 on your levy limit worksheet last year that you could, by 2/3 vote of the council, take as part of any budget year to increase your levy. That's $271,000. The challenge is it's not just 2/3 majority vote, but there's an obscure rule that we can't get clarification on very well from the DOR that says the debt service, the principal outstanding for the community in end of 22 compared to the end of 23 as part of the calculation, and the debt and the principal amount by the end of 23 has to be less than what was there in 22. It's a future number. It's hard to come up with. I don't know what you're going to borrow next year. Maybe it's $3 million, and maybe you have some TIF projects. So that makes that adjustment almost unusable. And in most cases, I don't know anybody who's taken it because they can't prove out that second aspect. So I wanted to mention you do have a carry forward that right now I don't think is probably usable for the city. But again, the flexibility here is you have around $3.6 million that you could be taking under Adjustment E. And it's not a take it all or not. It's, you could use $1 of it, or you could use 3.6 million of it as you start working through your budget in 2023. So before I leave levy limits, that's a little confusing probably for a lot, but questions?
Phil, going back to page 33, there's a local blogger who within the last few weeks gave his usual astute analysis and said that all the communities, they tax to the max, they tax to the limit. And it looks to me, as you were alluding to, that it looks like for this fiscal year, we're 24% of our limit.
Oh, from a borrowing capacity standpoint?
Oh, that's debt limit. That's
That's
not
debt
levy
limit. Yeah, that's debt limit. So, yeah,
That's debt
probably
limit. I'm
not the
confusing
right
two different.
chart, but to your point, that's where I was getting at with this chart here. And I know it's a little bit hard to read in your packet. If you are levying to the max, what you are taking then is what you levied for last year, and you would be adding roughly 3,574,000. I can't read the exact number. That's your debt adjustment number that you could take. In a sense, you certainly are not levying to the max. You're probably at, maybe less than 90% of where you could be legally under levy limits. So you have flexibility that you could increase your levy by. Now, again, what does that mean for taxes for everybody? I get that's the other side of the equation. I'm not saying that there's no impact, but under levy limits, you are allowed to take up to another roughly $3.6 million.
Okay, thanks.
Is there any other questions on? So there's a second side to this equation, expenditure restraint, that you're part of, that typically is a constraint around how much you can increase your levy as well. So expenditure restraint, again, there's the statute in here, allows you to increase your expenditures up to, and in the blue here, general fund expenditures may be increased by a percentage, which includes a combination of the consumer price index plus 60% of your net new construction number. So normally, what we see is somewhere around 3 to 4%. Normally, unique year in 2023 for obvious reasons. The consumer price index number alone is 7.7%. 60% of your net new construction is 1.16, equals 8.864%. I mean, you could essentially this year, and we don't expect this to continue because it's normally a lot less than this. This is a year that you would have the ability to increase your expenditures because of the fact that the consumer price index number is so high this year. So you're kind of in a unique time where you have the ability under expenditure restraint to grow your expenditures and not run amok with the expenditure restraint law and potentially lose revenue there. And at the same time, you have the ability under levy limits to increase your levy as well using that debt adjustment number. So kind of a unique year. You're not alone. Anybody who has capacity under levy limits are, for once, not being constrained by expenditure restraint. It's the double calculation. So really the expenditures under the expenditure restraint include general fund expenditures plus transfers out to other funds. So anyway, in your case, again, you have more flexibility in 23 budget than you've probably had ever, just because we typically don't see consumer price index numbers this high. So I think that was kind of the message, is it's a unique year from a budget standpoint, and the city's in pretty good position that you have some flexibility that a lot of communities don't, to grow your levy under levy limits if you choose to. Questions? A lot of material.
Yeah, anything? Thank you, as always. Your
Thank you.
information, your wisdom, passing it on to us. We appreciate it. We'll definitely use this information as we get into our budget season here.
Okay, if something comes up and you need us to run anything, let us know.
Sounds great.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for being here. And we're going to move on to our consent agenda, consisting items 2 and 3.
Second.
Thank you, Kaler and Allen. Any question on these? Hearing none, all those in favor, so by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And going on to agenda items for consideration, we're on number 5, ordinance to rezone approximately 0.69 acres of land located north of 450 East Water Street from M2 Heavy Industrial District to I1 Institutional Public Service District, I, Washington County. And we'll have a brief presentation by Jim Marinke. Jim?
Good evening. Tonight we're asking the council to approve an ordinance to rezone approximately 0.69 acres. This is actually located on the north side of East Water Street. This is by the Family Promise area. The county is rezoning that portion and going to be selling that to Family Promise for future development. So as a part of this, we're asking the council to consider the change from the heavy industrial that we have out there to the institutional, which follows suit for their use that they're proposing to do.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
Second.
Thank you, Kaler and Allen. Any questions on this one? Then seeing none, all those in favor, so by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, we got reports. Report by Alderman Bergquist regarding the library board meeting.
The only one tonight, too. Wow.
It's on one page.
Thank you. Cool. The last meeting of the library board was held last week on September 20th. After the Pledge of Allegiance, we approved the agenda and financial expenditures for August. This included an explanation of what appeared to be a rather large transaction for the month. The reason was that our library is actually responsible for dispersing county monies to 4 other libraries within Washington County, so that's what that was about. The financial report also reflected transactions for the month that included a donation from Sandra Gruley. Thank you, Sandra, for your donation. The library director's report advised us of Steve's involvement with the Leadership West Bend program once a month on Thursdays, where Steve will be out of the office. He also explained the story room AV upgrades and told us that flooring and window treatments are still pending. We have candidates for the circulation manager position, which is good. Steve participated in the League of Wisconsin Municipalities webinar, Building Relationships with Your Municipal Clerks. Yes, so that was good. October 7th is set as the meeting date for staff participation in the Building the Strategic Plan with Paul Roback. Remember, that's an ongoing thing for us. We also had more leaks in the vestibule area, which leads to the downstairs recreation center, hoping that that they work out a solution soon. The library board president reminded us that it is time for Steve's evaluation and how to submit our comments. Agenda items included closing the library on the day after Thanksgiving at the request of the team. The library will be open on the following Saturday, though, so after review of past attendance numbers, the board agreed to close for that day. Joseph, our financial secretary for the board, explained that he had spoken to our financial advisor concerning a money market account that we carried. Due to market conditions, it was advised to place this money in CDs rather than a money market account. Details were discussed to get the most interest for our money. Following discussion, it was agreed to allow Joseph to make these changes. We also agreed to allow Joseph to enroll in online banking to allow quicker response and reporting of our financial transactions. The last item on the agenda was the status of this year's budget negotiations. Steve explained the latest updates and possible changes following an upcoming meeting with city staff. which I believe occurred today. We were advised of the possible need for a special meeting to approve our budget or the use of electronic voting, which is allowed by our bylaws. The next meeting is scheduled for October 18th.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Alderman Bergquist? Then I'll open up to the council. If there's any announcements for the good of the order. Seeing none, having no further business for the common council, I adjourn by the call of the chair. Have a good night.